Hey guys, Koi here. So today I wanted to do a video about my thoughts and analysis towards Stanley Kubrick's classic film The Shining. Everyone knows about it. Everyone loves it. It's a classic. It's ingrained in our pop culture. But I don't want to talk about any of that. There was a documentary released in 2012 called Room 237. It was made by Rodney Asher, who also did a really humorous documentary about the old Screen Gems logo titled The S from Hell. That's well worth checking out. I think it's still up on YouTube. Anyway, Room 237 made a pretty big splash when it came out. For most people, it was an introduction to all of these theories and subliminal messages deliberately placed in the film by Kubrick, and it's really interesting. I'll give it that. I do recommend it as a sort of The Shining for Dummies guide, but I have issues with it. For one, who the hell are these people talking about the movie? What's with the guy who says like every other word like he's stoned off his ass? And then you have the dude who thinks there's a hidden boner in the movie because this one character is turned at an angle and there's something on a desk that makes it look like he has a raging erection. There's some really silly stuff going on in that movie, and I think it kind of takes away from the very real fact that there's a lot going on in The Shining. And let's start at the beginning. It's the 70s. Horror is big. The Exorcist made a ton of money, got everybody talking. Stanley Kubrick was a very competitive person. As a teenager in New York, he played chess against adults and was undefeated. He made a lot of money that way. Dude had an ego. At this point in the 70s, Stanley wanted to create the ultimate horror film, and for some reason, Stephen King's novel The Shining stood out to him. He actually went through boxes of books to find source material, and he literally threw them against the wall if he didn't see any potential. But The Shining caught his eye, so why would he change it so much for his adaptation? I mean, think about it. All the iconic imagery from the film, the hedge maze, the elevator opening up and flooding the hallway with blood, the creepy twin girls, none of that was in the novel. Kubrick used King's novel as a template. I don't think he ever intended to make a straight adaptation. It's not that he was illiterate. I mean, his adaptation of Clockwork Orange was very faithful to Anthony Burgess's novel. So let's delve into that some more. There are no ghosts in the movie The Shining. I know what you're thinking right now, Coy. That's bullshit. The house is full of ghosts. Hotel, I mean, I'm sorry. What about that creepy ass chick in the tub? I mean, I realize it sounds crazy, but there's a ton of evidence for my point. Number one, Kubrick was an atheist. He didn't believe in the supernatural or the afterlife or any of that. I mentioned The Exorcist earlier. Stanley actually turned down the offer to direct that movie because he didn't believe in possession. And just a few years later, why would he suddenly change his mind and make a ghost story? Number two, there's a direct quote from Kubrick, and it's the only bit of real insight he gave about this movie's meaning. He said The Shining's about a family going crazy together. Um, Number three, every bit of ghostly phenomenon can be explained, I think. In one scene, Danny has marks on his neck and his clothes are all roughed up. He said that the creepy bathtub chick did it. Isn't it possible that Jack did this to his own son and doesn't remember because he's a drunk with a history of abuse towards Danny, and Danny didn't, um, want to come to terms with that, so he made up this story, and alcohol magically being at the hotel so ghosts can sway Jack to kill his family. Isn't it likely that Jack brought along some booze because he knew it would be a long ass winter there? And here's the one that, supposedly proves the existence of ghosts in The Shining. Jack is locked in a storage room in the kitchen, no way out. He supposedly speaks to this evil ghost Grady who opens the door and lets him out. That's got to be proof, right? I don't see it that way. I think Danny let him out. I mean, think about that. Danny has ESP. He can see traces of what's going to happen. Stanley Kubrick believed that ESP was a real phenomenon, so he included it here. Now, isn't it possible that Danny saw traces of the final scene in the hedge maze, so he let Jack out to lead him into the hedge maze and trap him there so he could save his mom and himself and get rid of his evil, abusive dad forever? Uh, but Danny doesn't have full ESP. He can't see everything that's going to happen, so he didn't foresee Halloran getting the axe to the chest. And now that we're on the subject, let's talk about Grady. This is a great example of the theme of duality that just pervades this entire film. When Jack is being interviewed for his job, Ullman tells him about a man named Charles Grady who killed his family in 1975, I believe. And later on, Jack is talking to a man named Grady. It makes sense, right? I mean, Grady's ghost wants Jack to kill his family, typical horror movie stuff, but there's a problem. The Grady that Jack meets introduces himself as Delbert Grady. And when they meet, Grady is a butler, not the caretaker. And totally different time periods, even. This Grady is from the 20s. So they're two totally different people. Charles Grady is dead and gone. Delbert Grady, I think, came from Jack Torrance's imagination, this similar but totally made up entity who represents Jack's hatred for his own existence and his family. The twin girls are a literal symbol of this duality, and just look at the composition throughout the movie. In typical Kubrick fashion, there's so much symmetry in the way each shot is framed. It works perfectly for what he was trying to convey here. In the novel, Jack's car is a red Volkswagen Beetle. In the movie, it's a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. Hell, in one scene, we actually see an overturned red Beetle buried in the snow. So Kubrick is telling us right there he has hijacked Stephen King's vision and turned it on its head. I mean, literally, this isn't some crazy theory. It's all right there on the screen. Let's talk about mirrors for a little bit. This kind of expands on the whole duality thing. Mirrors are really important to The Shining. Even the opening scene, the huge body of water reflecting the sky, and there are two worlds right there, like intermingled. Right before Jack, meets Grady, he is walking down this long hallway. Each time he passes a mirror, he throws this weird little tantrum. Not everything is as it seems in this movie. I mean, just look at the seemingly normal moment where Jack's wife, Wendy, brings him breakfast in bed. He's all content looking, he's smiling, but we're looking at the entire scene through a reflection in a mirror in the room. This sort of imagery is all over the place in The Shining. So, what do the mirrors mean? I think Kubrick's message ultimately is to reflect our own darkness back to us. The way I see it, The Shining, the film at least, is a story about a cycle of violence that has existed forever and will always exist. Timelines don't match up. When Jack is supposedly talking to this ghostly bartender named Lloyd, he mentions he accidentally broke Danny's arm 3 years beforehand. That's a completely different time than what Wendy tells a doctor in an earlier scene. So, right there, you see it's not the only time Jack has done shit like this. And he was probably abused as a child, too. In an early scene in the Overlook Hotel lobby, Jack is seen reading a Playgirl magazine dated January 1978. And for one thing, it's a fucking weird magazine to have laying around a fancy hotel lobby. Like, these rich people aren't going to be sitting around looking at hairy 70s dicks while they're waiting for their luggage to be brought in. So maybe it's something Jack brought along, right? As suppressed homosexual feelings, maybe he was abused by his father for that. So he grew up and tried to fit in by having a wife and child. I mean, there's no intimacy at all between Jack and Wendy. It's obvious. No love, no attachment. There's nothing there. Jack to me seems like this self loathing, miserable creature. So he hates this family because he ultimately hates himself and cannot accept himself. And he beats his kid because that's all he knows. It's violence. The hate is just ingrained into this man. And the scary thing is, the theme goes way deeper. It's not just about violence perpetuating itself within the family unit. It's about violence in all of humanity. If you saw Room 237, if you read Rob Ager's excellent multi-part analysis online, which I highly recommend, it inspired this video. It really blew my mind, but um, if you're aware of those, then you probably know about the Native American genocide subtext that's running throughout this movie. I mean, you can't fucking escape it. The Calumet baking powder cans, which are coincidentally perfectly turned so the Native American faces are looking at Jack in the scene where he's locked in the kitchen. The whole hotel uh, was even built on a native burial ground, and they had to fight off attacks um, from the natives while they're constructing this hotel. And that wasn't in the novel, at least not as far as I can remember. So why would Kubrick write this in? You know, why would this be in the movie so heavily? I mean, it's a typical horror movie cliche now, but not so much in 1980. I mean, you add that to everything else, like the abundance of Native American artwork throughout the hotel. Even Wendy looks more and more Native American as the movie goes on. I mean, towards the end, with her long braided black hair and the tan dress, it almost seems like Kubrick is sort of beating us over the head with this type of imagery. I mean, some people say this is what The Shining is all about, the Native American genocide, and I think that's only part of it. I think it's symbolism that reflects the bigger idea. I mean, this hotel was built on death. It's this crazy, impossible labyrinth of darkness. Nothing about it makes sense. The hedge maze is nowhere in sight when we first get a look at the hotel. Then it's suddenly there. The window behind Ullman during Jack's interview makes no fucking sense. We clearly see there's a hallway right behind the office just before Jack enters. But then when he goes in, there's this giant window behind Ullman. This brilliant light is pouring in. And Kubrick is messing with everybody's head. I mean, he admitted to this in an interview, and he designed the whole set to create this uneasy atmosphere. So the Overlook Hotel is a literal maze. It's full of crazy ass patterns. The dimensions aren't right. The room sizes are way off. We really get the sense that this is a place of evil incarnate, but it's all covered up, just like in the novel. A lot of really messed up things happen in this place. It's isolated. It's like a separate reality where all these dark desires can come to fruition. But unlike the novel, it's not haunted. This movie has haunted people instead, I think. This family is haunted and disturbed, and they're all going absolutely mental in this hotel. I think the line that Allman says during the interview about cabin fever is important. He briefly mentions that Grady killed his family because of the madness that settles in when you're stuck in one place for an extended period of time. So all this shit that the Torrance family is witnessing, it's all a manifestation of their inner fears. Like Kubrick said, it's a family going crazy together, and it's brilliant. Now the ending, um, there are so many theories. Reincarnation, I think, is the most popular one. The hotel has consumed Jack and made him part of its history. I don't agree with those. I think that the photo you see, where the camera slowly pans in and you see Jack in this photo dated 1921, I think it's a metaphor. I don't think that photo actually existed in the hotel. I think it's just a visual to wrap up Kubrick's message. Violence is a cycle, and Jack Torrance is, in this movie, the face of that violence waiting to come out. I think what he's saying is that Jack Torrance figuratively has existed all throughout history. This force of hidden desire, the snarling beast inside of man. I mean, by the end of the movie, Jack becomes a literal monster. he becomes the Minotaur inside the maze, all hunched over and shouting incoherently. He is fully transformed into the animal. Again, something that um, wasn't in King's novel. So it's a really nihilistic, bleak message. It's funny because King's novel ends on such an optimistic note. The hotel has been destroyed, the evil has been put to rest. Danny and Wendy and Halloran live a good life far away, and they can rebuild. All this heartwarming shit. Kubrick read that and went, "Fucking nope." I'm gonna crush all those rainbows and sunshine and give you the cold reality. Jack Torrance represents human evil, and he may go away for a while, in this case, frozen, but he will show up again in a different disguise. Jack looked insane from the moment we saw him, and I've heard criticism about that, but I think it was deliberate. We were never supposed to root for Jack, or think he's a good guy underneath it all, like in the book. And I think that's the scariest part of the movie. Wendy and Danny are trapped in this endless configuration of hallways, rooms, and madness with pure evil. And even scarier, pure evil that will never go away. It lives in the hotel, it lives in us, and it's ingrained into our collective past. Horrible things keep happening that we overlook. Um, that's some heavy shit, man. Anyways, I don't want to go on too long. That about sums up my interpretation of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Like, subscribe, share if you dig this video. There's going to be more on the way. So, see ya.